Hello and welcome to week 6 of 3D animation and 3D modeling. This week we want to continue with our Snowman project, and this week we want to take a look at keyframe animation. So let's get started. Before we get started with the actual keyframing, I want to show you the timeline. And this first bar below the perspective window panel is your timeline. If you notice, there's a slight gray bar that indicates what your current keyframe is. Earlier I had done some, I just want to delete those really quick. So the idea is that these are frames in time, and usually it's about 24 to 30 frames per second, and I can set this snowman's position or keyframe any attribute in time, and this is your current frame. You have a few controls here where I can go to the beginning of the playback range to the end. I can go to the next frame, I can go to a previous frame. If I have keyframes selected, keyframes are visible by a red bar, so I can advance to the next keyframe or the previous preframe and keyframe, and these just are playback, so you can play in real time what you've animated. Now what I see here, mine's 0 to 100. It may be different than what you see, but that's not a big deal. You can easily change that with your range slider here. And the range slider says this is just kind of what your playback range is going to start at. This is what it's going to end at. And this is your total number of frames. So I suppose let's change this to 200. Nothing really changes except it's showing me 0 through 100, but there's a total of 200 frames, so I can drag this up to 200. Usually I don't use this feature very often. I'll usually set it, my total and the end playback time the same. And I'll just go ahead and so 200 should be plenty. We could probably even get away for this exercise for 100. So I see 100 frames, and so if you have any question as to why this might have looked different. So time slider, range slider. This is the total number of frames, and this is how many you see at any one given time. Okay, there's a few more things here. We won't get into animation layers or character sets. This is your auto keyframe toggle, and what it does is once I have keyframed an attribute once, then if I make any change in that attribute later, it'll automatically keyframe it for me, which is nice. Sometimes it can get in the way and cause problems. So but that's what that is, and I'll demonstrate in a moment. So first, let's demonstrate what a keyframe is and how to set one. Very easy. You click a period in your time slider. I'm clicking 20. I can click it here, or I can set it here. I can say 25. And then you select an object, and what you're animating an attribute for the selected object. So if I wanted to animate the arm to wave, I click the arm and I figure out which rotation we want to. Alright, so first we want to keyframe the initial state, which is what it's at. So before we move anything, we right click and go to key selected. As we do that, a bar appears. When we scrub through the timeline, nothing happens. All we did is set an initial state. We can go to 30 now, and I can move this up, and right click, key selected, go to 35, move it down, right click, key selected, go to 35, raise it back up, key selected. Maybe I wanted to freeze, so I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to I want it to kind of stop, key selected, and let's see what that looks like. So notice we set a keyframe here, and Maya is going to interpolate the steps between there for every frame. All right, and then suppose we want to go and then select the elbow, which I don't remember if you guys did the same thing, but if you followed my tutorial previously, I created a second object here with a pivot point at the other stick so we could animate that as well. And suppose right when it hits, let's I want to keyframe the X again, and as it's coming back I want to key selected, key selected, I'm just following the same animation of the previous stick, just lagging behind a little bit. That's often called secondary animation, and we'll see if it works. Sometimes what I have in mind and what actually happens don't necessarily equate. So yeah, so as the main one as this one moves up, it's like the second limb is kind of lagging behind, and that's what I did. So I animated the first one, and the second one kind of lags behind, and it's following a very similar motion up and down. It's almost like the stick's broken, but it's still attached. So you get the idea of what a simple keyframe animation would be, and I can play that and see what it looks like. And in the next exercise, I'm going to maybe make him jump and have some fun. But we're going to learn how to keyframe animation. We will get into the auto keyframe, so you don't have to go up here every time and right click, key selected. But that's the base of this whole tutorial: is select an attribute or select an object, select this attribute, right click and keyframe it. Make sure you know it, and then advance the time and keyframe it again. Maya will interpolate anything in between. That's the mechanics of it, but animation gets much more complicated than that. Just because you can keyframe something, that's the beginning. Then to make it look convincing, make it look visually pleasing, that's the challenge of animation. It's not setting the keyframes. That's not hard at all. But like convincing secondary animation, there's Disney back in the 30s developed these 12 principles of animation that would make these animations look more convincing. Things like squash and stretch, I don't know if you've heard of that, or anticipation, or primary and secondary animation, kind of what I was showing here. I am not an expert at these things, but they do make a difference if you use them in your animations to make things more interesting, and I may touch on a couple of those as we get started and continue. But that's it for this animation, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.